Hey there. Welcome to episode 49 of Fresh Air at 5, the podcast. Okay, in this episode this week, I start off by talking about don't judge a podcast by its cover. And the first Monday, I listened to 3 podcasts, and you know what? I had my prejudices about what I was going to hear out of the gates that was turned on its head by the time I listen to the podcast. So, we have a provocation on the cover of a book, gets our attention so that we dig in. What are you doing with titles of podcasts, and how do you respond ahead of time to what you think you're going to hear compared to what you're actually going to hear? All right, that's about it. So there's a whole lot more in here, and I end off with an educational DuctTape episode with Jake Miller about culturally responsive teaching. Super great with guest Nyree Clark. Take a listen to that. Have a happy week of listening, and we will talk to you. Bye.
I'm Andrew Murata, host of the Education, Leadership, and Beyond podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Fresh Air at 5, the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Carpenter. Fresh Air at 5 is my regular attempt to exercise by walking about my neighborhood to take in podcast content, then reflect in an unedited video, which I finally post to my Twitter channel. This podcast will be a regular collection of the audio from these selfie videos. You can follow me on Twitter at FreshAirAtFive or check out my website, briancarpenter.com, for other content I have created and collected. Hey, PLN, Monday, November 29, 2021. I can't believe November's almost over tomorrow. And then we step into December and all of the festivities that go along with December. Christmas and winter things and, oh my goodness, getting a break from school and all those things. But here we are today, and I'm out, and you can see that it's raining, and it's been raining all weekend. And here where I am, that is causing some anxiety right now because the rain has been relentless this past month of November. And in this past weekend, I think we've probably got close to 4 inches of rain, or 80 to 100 millimeters of rain. And that causes anxiety. So as much as I don't mind the rain, I'm minding it today because it's affected so many people this weekend, this past 2 weeks, with flooding in our prairies below us as the Nooksack River has overflowed its banks and flowed into Canada from the Washington and has flooded what was once a lake bed. It still is a lake bed, but once was a lake. And yes, so that's happening. All right, so this morning, out for my walk, Fresh Air at 5. This is episode 49 of the podcast, so can't believe I'm already here at 49. I listened to Tom Schimmer on episode 52. He talked about, if not Ed and Tom, I would say probably fly fishing guide, because I could still be a teacher and coach as I work with people. I really appreciated your talk about racism and equity and inclusion with Hedreich Nichols, and I've listened to her podcast in the past, not much recently, but important and great work that she's doing. People, take a listen to this conversation because it will challenge your bias. And then finally, you wrapped up with 6 myths about summative assessment, and I appreciated hearing your conversation about that because I am about putting numbers on things and struggle with the formative, but it's getting better. Thanks so much, Tom. Bye. Hey PLN, November 30th, 2021 this morning, out for Fresh Air at 5. I saw in my podcast queue episode 100 of the Che and Pav Show. You're going, the Che and Pav Show? I've never heard of the Che and Pav Show. Well, it's now called the Che and Pav Show. It's called the Staff Room Podcast. And so it's episode 100 of the Staff Room Podcast, episode, their very first, calling it the Che and Pav Show. And Che and Pav, you guys have been rocking it. And I have not been a listener since the beginning. I think I jumped in, in the 30s, in the 40s or something like that, about a year and maybe a year and a half ago. And I took a listen to your podcast, and I was curious about how you're doing what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you and I we connected one Sunday and went over some Adobe Spark to grow your understanding of graphic creations a little bit, and we shared some resources, and that was fantastic. But you know what, I want to say that I appreciate you for your honesty and your getting out there and your provocative names. You know what, I have looked at many of your recent podcasts and go, okay, I got some thoughts about what I just read in the name of the podcast, but Carpenter, you better listen, because that's not what they always bring. And so I am a listener, and you guys put a name out there, and I come with some implicit bias about what I think about the podcast already before I listen. And typically my mind is changed just a little bit, and I grow, because I am a believer in the growth mindset, and it is not easy, and it's not about my position, but it's about growing. And so, yes, you guys are doing a great job. Keep it going. And people, if you haven't listened to the Staff Room Podcast, it's not called that anymore. It's called the Che and Pav Show. I want you to subscribe to the Che and Pav Show and take a look. You might have to look for the Staff Room Podcast. I don't know what you're going to do about your podcast on Anchor, but anyhow, people, you're looking for the Che and Pav Show. Great job, people. Love you guys. Talk to you soon. Okay, bye. One more thing for November 30th, 2021. This morning I listened to episode 9 of Mindset Mondays, and George, thank you for bringing us episode 9 and the title of it. And I had it all figured out even before I got there, because that's what I do with titles of podcasts. We all do, we take a look at the title. We have a good idea what you're going to talk about. And episode 9 was the power of boring, or being boring. And so can't remember if the word be was in there or not. But anyhow, I had it figured out, because, I talk about boredom with my kids, and my kids are like, oh, I'm so bored. And I'm like, you're not bored. You got your device in your hand. So put the device down, and then let's talk about being bored, and let's see what you do. And that's where I was, when I was younger, as so were you, but before we had devices, that we would, have to find something creative to do. And I associate boredom with a creation initiator. And so you're bored, let's find something and let's get interested in something so you're not bored anymore. But that's not what you're talking about in here, George. You're talking about the power of being boring in your routines and what you do on a consistent basis. And consistency is the byline, I would say, for this one episode, is that what do you do consistently that makes a difference in your life? And so I'm out walking every morning for Fresh Air at 5, and I go, okay, I'm out walking, and I walk the same route, and eventually, after like a long while, I come home from my walk, put away my raincoat, and get onto my cup of coffee, and hours into the day, I'm like, did I walk this morning? Oh yeah, I did, because I'm feeling pretty good, right? And so it's about that little hard work that I do in the morning that helps me feel better later in the day. The easy thing would be for me to sleep in and just sleep in bed and get up and go to work feeling more rested. But no, I got to get the juices flowing so that I can do the work. So that's what George is talking about in this episode 9 of Mindset Mondays on the Innovators Mindset Podcast, about doing things consistently. Thanks, George. Appreciate you. Thanks, buddy. Bye. One last thing for November 30th, 2021. As I'm rounding the corner, coming home now, I listened to Teachers on Fire episode 211 as Tim Cavey brings us a Spark episode, which is entitled, We Are All Developing Learners. Now, the word, if you're not familiar with the proficiency scale, just sounds like we're all just developing learners in our space. And no, that's not what Tim means. He talked about how the proficiency scale of emerging developing, proficient, and extending that is used here in British Columbia as the 4-point almost, you would say scale without putting numbers on it, has to do with developing previous to proficient and looking at learning standards and how we assess our students. We want our students to all be proficient and extending, and we want to see those students that are soaring and striving and going farther. But we look at developing as a deficiency. But you know what? Tim's argument in this episode has to do with the fact that we are not all good at the things that we want to learn. He did an exercise with his staff at the beginning of this year. They did at his school where they put up a "We Are All Developing Learners" bulletin board and talked about the areas that their staff individually are working on and their level of proficiency at these things. And if I was proficient at everything that I did, I would not be as engaged in what I'm supposed to be learning. And so that is an important part of the learning process, is that we are not as good as we think we want to be, and that there's always something to learn. My area of passion is fly fishing, and I spend time fly tying and tying flies and working on that craft of imitating natural things so that I can trick a wild thing to bite it. So that's my area of developing that I'm working on. I've been tying flies for a long time, and I wouldn't say I'm proficient. Still developing. Thanks, Tim. Peace out. Bye. Hey, PLN, December 2, 2021, out for Fresh Air at 5. It's not raining. The floodwaters have been behaving themselves reasonably out there in the flats, and it's a great morning. I'm so thankful for the lack of rain, because that just helps the recovery efforts of all those that are down below. And the Canadian military came and they put a big Tiger Dam across the highway, which closed the highway, but it's helping to manage the direction of water and the recovery efforts. So that's a little update there. All right, as I was proposing a bit ago, I said I was going to listen to a new podcast each week from the Educational Podcast Network, and that's what I belong to with Chris Nessie and company. And today's podcast that I listened to for the first time for me is episode 184 of the Education, Leadership, and Beyond podcast with Andrew Murata. And so, Andrew, nice to meet you. And this is the first time I've listened, and I'm going to keep on listening because you have a fantastic show. As you brought some insight into leadership. I like at the top of this episode, you talked about, how people aren't going to have the same opinion as you, and how we in leadership need to not be so concerned about everybody having the same opinion of us, but doing the best that we can in the situation that we're at. So I really appreciate that, because that's just something that I'm working through as a young leader. I'm not young, but I'm not old either, but I've been, in my early 50s, just thinking about how leadership goes. All right, you talked with a PhD student, Hunter Newman, who's at Duke University doing biomedical research in the engineering field, and super great to hear his story. And so just bringing him to the fore so that we could meet him and hear about him, that's a great thing that you're doing. I really, really dig that. That's awesome, because we need to cheer on our former students and our students in our spaces right now. We don't know the impact that we're going to have on our students, so that's a takeaway that I'm getting out of this. Speak life into your students. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Hunter. Bye. One more thing for December 2, 2021, I just picked up episode 5 of season 5 of Shooks and Giff with Jen Giffen and guest Emma Cotier out of Victoria. And I said it wrong, Emma Cotier out of Victoria. And Emma is an educator, middle school educator, and brilliant Google trainer type like Jen, and it was fantastic to listen to just the very first part of this morning, because I'm home already, Jen, from my walk, and gotta finish listening to this later, and I will do so while I'm delivering papers later today. But just wanted to put this in there that I've only listened to the first maybe third of this episode, and I've already got some takeaways of simple things that can save nanoseconds that I didn't know. And fantastic to talk about you collaborating with Darren Molte, and I got to meet him in Victoria at a EdTech Team Canada event a bit ago, and it was fantastic. So yes, people, take a listen to Shooks and GIF Season 5, Episode 5 if you have not, and I am looking forward to the rest of the gold that is coming to my earbuds later today. Thanks, Emma and Jen. We'll see you and hear from you a bit later. Bye. Oh, and Jen, thanks for putting my bumper at the front of your episode. Super fun to hear my own voice. As you know, like, I've got a podcast and we're approaching episode 50, and that's coming up next week. So of Fresh Air at 5. So yes, thanks for being a big fan. I appreciate it so much. I'm a big fan of your show and Kim's as well. Thanks, bye. Later on the same day, December 2, 2021. Good afternoon to you all. And I'm out delivering papers. And I caught up and finished the end of the Emma Cottier episode on Shooks and GIF, Season 5, Episode 5. And Jen and Emma, they just rocked it. And Emma, I am totally blown away by just even hearing about the content that your students are creating in Google Drawings and using shapes in Google Slides. And I need to go and dig into the resources that you have so freely shared. And I am so excited. I'm like so excited. I'm in the middle of Tony Vincent's Classy Graphics Fall 2021 cohort, and I've got an assignment that just dropped out into the classroom yesterday, and so I've got some homework to do for him, and the work to do, not homework, learning to do with Tony Vincent. But I'm also going to dig into the work that you are doing, and I am super excited, Emma, about seeing some of the creations in Google Drawings that you've talked about. Jen, also the extensions that you've talked about the font add-ons for slides and docs, so that we can get different fonts and things. So very exciting, and I'm gonna go check out these show notes for sure. People, go check out the show notes and listen to this episode. Go listen, because you'll be blown away by the things that you can see and hear and do with your students. Not so much hearing, but seeing and doing with your students. All right, peace out. Have a fabulous day, everybody. And Carpenter out for today. Bye. Hey PLN, it is December 3, 2021. It's Friday, people. We've made it to Friday. Yes, you're here at the end of the week. Are you ready for the weekend? You got one more day to go at the point that I'm recording right now, because it's early Friday morning, but you're getting here, and Saturday's coming, and you can get some rest this weekend and recharge, because there's only a couple weeks before winter break is coming. So I'm excited about that, looking forward to that, and also looking forward to how much is going to happen in the next 2 weeks at school, with learning, in our community, my daughter with her choir, all kinds of stuff like that. So that is coming. Yes, excited. All right, so this morning I listened to Educational Duct Tape with Jake Miller, and he had on guest Nyree Clark, and they talked about culturally responsive teaching and about sensitivity to culture and bringing all of yourself as professionally as you can, and having all of your students as safely as they can to be in your classroom so that they can express themselves and make a difference for their own learning. You know, yesterday I was talking to my students and I talked about student voice, and one student says, well, Mr. Carpenter, if you put it on the paper, then we should be able to put it on a poster. And I was talking about this pep talk generator that I found, and I'm like, well, is that appropriate for school? And she's like, well, if you put it on the paper and you said that we could use this, then we should be able to put on a poster. I said, I guess you're right. And the thing about student voice is we need to be open to student voice and hearing what our students say, because if I am dictating what they're going to be saying, then I'm not actually listening to their voice. All right, so this morning, as I was listening to Educational Duct Tape, Jake included a segment where I talked about learning management systems from a FreshAirAtFive walk that I did a couple weeks ago, and thanks, Jake, for including that. You know, it's fantastic to see the connections that we have with each other over time. I'm a big fan of Educational Duct Tape. I have the book. If you don't get the book, get the book. All right, happy Friday, all. Okay, bye. As my one word for 2021 is appreciate, I appreciate you giving me a listen as I've created this podcast experience for you. It's a unique Blinkist or Coles Notes version of the content I take in, like a highlight reel, so that you can hopefully find other interesting podcasts you may not have considered before. I've recorded the specific podcast episodes in the show notes for your learning convenience. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming episodes. And if you enjoy this podcast and its format, share it with someone else. Tweet about your experience or give it a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Fresh Air at 5 can also be found on Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here, and on the Education Podcast Network, podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. I hope you have a fantastic day and get some fresh air before the day is out, and take care of yourself because you're worth it.